I'm just going to use this domain against for a minute. It's nice to be here. What I think I'll do is I'll read from the book a little bit, and then we can talk, and I'll take questions like that. Does anybody? Do I have any former students here? Wow, it's the first time. That's great. I've been teaching so long. You know, it's June, right? I started teaching in the gym 40 years ago, in 1969, summer of '69. I went to a place called Salisbury, Connecticut. Okay, that's fine. Those are the snows of yesteryear. I'm enjoying my teaching at UC Irvine very much, and I'm going to stay with it. I was meant to be a teacher, clearly. I've been in La Jolla before. I used to come from Arizona when I was there at Arizona State for 20 years, and we would come to the beach cottages. My kids were little babies. They're both now 25. And one day it rained. I was at the beach cottages, and the shopper, I found a little shopper, you know, little one ads, nickel ads, or whatever. And there was a typewriter for sale in La Jolla. And I came over to get it. It's a typewriter, $8. And I came and got it. It was over here somewhere, and I bought it from a ham radio operator. He was 80, and he was making his ham radio operation go to computers. So he had this, 50-pound, whatever it was, Evinrude, or I forget Underwood, yeah. And so I took it back that day, and it continued to rain, and I started a story called The Sunny Billy Day. And it was one of those wonderful writing experiences where my kids were crawling around on the floor, and I was typing this story about this. I had an idea about a baseball player who was so charismatic that he could change an umpire's mind. Because I'm an old baseball player. And baseball, if it's about anything, is about the law. So I wrote this story, and then I took that. Actually, I loved that typewriter so much, I took it home to Arizona on the plane in the overhead compartment, and I put it on my picnic table out on the patio, and I put a plastic dishpan over it upside down, and it was there for. And I used to, when I get stuck, I'd go outside because there was nothing out there except the table and the typewriter. I'd take 2 or 3 sheets of paper, put them in, and it was a kind of a pure place for me. So I have fond memories of La Jolla. The Signal, I wrote Five Skies, a book that's all out of doors, and then I wrote The Signal, and one of these interviewers, there's a site called 3 Guys, 1 Book, or something like that. And he wrote, one of his criticisms is, why did you write a book without a roof? And I started thinking, what? And it is true that this book takes place all out of doors, too, in the Wind River Mountains of Wyoming. And I write about nature very carefully. I spend a lot of time indoors. I'm an old Utahn. I'm from Utah. I learned to fish when I was 6 or 7 with my dad in the mountains, in the Uinta Mountains there. And I love the woods. I mean, I came to know when I was about 8 that there was a place in the forest, the places I knew, Spirit Lake, and the north slope of the Uinta Mountains, and certain drainages in the Wind River Mountains, where there was something beyond the last tree that I didn't know about. And that still, when I start talking about this, it calls. So, and when you write a story about, I mean, this is, in a way, this is a love letter. This story, The Signal, is a love letter to the mountains. And when you write about the things you love, I think you do it carefully. I'm a big fan of attention, and I pay attention. So, anyway, what I'll do is I'll read a little bit. Mac is 30 years old. He's a rancher. He's been trying all his life to save his ranch. His father was a scrupulous person, as you'll hear. And he wants to save the ranch. It's against financial weather. He gets into trouble. He breaks the law. After his father dies, he loses his moral compass. He gets involved with some desperate characters, breaks the law, ends up in jail. And he's in jail. The book starts 3 pages before the bit I'm going to read. He's at a trailhead waiting, hoping that this woman he's been married to will come and make this trip with him. Their 10th annual trip. They've been married, and it's not clear, but he may have been divorced this year. And he's hoping that she'll come. So she is Vonnie, and then this part starts a month before at the jail. She'd come down to the county jail a month ago where there wasn't a visiting room, and Zeph Menadas had brought him out to the coffee room and let them talk for 20 minutes. He could not look at her, and after a full minute she said softly, "Well." It took him 3 attempts to break through the whisper and say, "You bet. Now I'm in the ashes." Each tear cost him, but he could not with his breath prevent them. He hadn't been in the room with her all year, and now the quiet in his heart burned again. "You're going to climb out of this?" "Somehow," he said. He was talking straight down to the table. "You look rough," she said. "You lost some weight." "Yeah, well, I'm about broke down, actually." That was all he could master, and he sat still. Zeph came in and set out 2 styrofoam cups and filled each from his own Stanley thermos, steaming coffee. "There's cream already in there," he pointed. When he capped the thermos and stepped out, Bonnie said, "Am I worried?" Her voice cracked him, every word. He could shake his head, and he did. "Yes," she said, "I am. Look, Mac, you'll be all right. Things will get better." "Disgrace," he said. "What?" "I am a disgrace," he said. Now she read him accurately. "You been this low?" He could not speak. "When you get out Wednesday, can you get yourself together? What do you need for gear? Do you have a ride?" Her solicitous questions broke over him. He could hold steady against his own withering self-regard, but he could not hold against her sympathy. When she put her hand on his wrist, the shock ran through him. "Chester'll come get me." "He's a good friend," she said. "Go fishing for a week. This will pass." "No can do." Then she leaned forward toward him and spoke against the top of his head. "Mac, don't let this beat you. You're a good man inside." Now the tears trickled, dripping onto the shirt sleeve of his jail shirt. She pushed his coffee until the cup touched his interleaved hands. "Here," she said, "drink this. Remember your coffee policy?" It was an old bit of theirs, but he could not respond. "Meet me," she said. "You can do that, right? We'll make our last trip next month. Meet me, and we'll fish Clark Lake for the last time." Somehow air came into his chest with that, and he said quietly, "Deal." He looked up into her face, the seriousness and the concern. He opened his hand and closed it around the little white cup. "I'll be there. Cold Creek Trailhead." He'd been here 10 times. This was the 10th time. Every year on the same day, the Ides of September, 9/15. The promise had been made the first time, and they kept it 9 times. "We'll do this every year." They weren't married the first time, and then they had been married 8 times, and now they weren't married again, as far as he knew. The lawyer letters, 5 of them, were filed unopened in the cubby of his father's roll top in the bunkhouse, where Mac lived on the home place, south of Woodrow, golden envelopes with return addresses, pretty as wedding invitations. He felt better tonight, strong for some reason, but he'd been getting better since walking out of jail 20 days ago. It could have been so much worse. He'd been running in low-rent behavior for almost a year, scrambling for money, crossing the line when it worked for him, drinking too much because it didn't matter, and the company he kept drank. He had trouble with the mortgage at the ranch, and he'd driven cars to Cheyenne and Rock Springs more than once, not asking what was in the trunk, just taking the $1,000 and walking away. He'd been an idiot, and he'd rusted like an old post when the weather turned. Now he shook his head at it in dark wonder. It was like the old song, "He once was lost, and now he was found," though there wasn't much left. He knew this trip was the right thing, and he'd even gotten well enough to call her and let her off the hook. Last week he left a message saying it was okay if she couldn't make it, and that he appreciated the help. He knew where there were some fish. He didn't want the sympathy vote, didn't need it, but, he told her, he was going fishing at the appointed hour. He'd met Vonnie when they were both 17, and he didn't like her immediately because it was his personal policy to dislike all the people who came to the ranch. The families from Grosse Pointe and Greenwich and Manhattan and Princeton, and from the 10 other Platinum Republics in their beautiful flannel shirts and new Levi's. He treated them well and saw to their safety around the horses, and he taught them what he could about the ranch and securing knots and fire safety and the birds and the snakes and the occasional bears. He took them to Big Springs and Rock Creek trailheads, but he didn't bring them here. He envied their gear, their bright boots, their gorgeous bone pocket knives, but he never stole one. He was quiet and known as being quiet, but it was not an act. He had learned that it was the way he kept any power at all. After his mother died of the cancer and his father and the ranch manager, Sawyer Day, saw the money story, they had started taking 10 weeks of guests in the summers. They needed the money. They hired a great cook, a woman named Amarantha out of Logan, Utah.